Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on improving our player input handling in our battle scene, and we added in a new game object for doing our cursor animation for when we need player input. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up. So let's get started. Alright, so now we have our battle state machine done. We're going to go ahead and start working on our battle scene polish. And so this is what we'll be adding in our game feel, and we'll be making our battle scene more complete. And so to get that started, the first thing we're going to do is we'll work on text animations. And so we're going to be updating our battle menu to actually animate our text when it appears on the screen. Alright, so to actually go ahead and animate our Phaser 3 text game object, we're going to go ahead and create a new timer event using the Phaser 3 library. And so our timer event is going to allow us to specify a callback that'll be invoked after a set period of time, and it's going to allow us to have it be repeatable, and so then that way we can do this callback a number of times until we've finished displaying all of our text. And so this timer event is going to be very similar to our delayed call that we've done before in our code. The delayed call is actually going to be a shortcut for the add event method we'll be using here, which will create our timer events. And so to actually go ahead and get started with our code, what we'll do is we're going to make a new util file for animating our text. So if we come into our utils subfolder, let's add a new file, and we're going to call this text utils.js. And so inside here, we'll go ahead and export out a new function, and we're going to call this animate text. And we will go ahead, and so when we want to animate our text, the first thing we're going to need is our Phaser 3 scene. That way we can actually reference our clock. Then we need to provide a target. So this is going to be our target game object that we want to animate. So it's going to be our Phaser 3 text game object. Then we're also going to need to know what the text is that we want to display. So this will be our text string we want to show. And then finally, we're going to add a configuration. And so our config is going to be an object that allows us to specify a callback if we want to have one, and it's going to allow us to specify a delay before we actually start running this function. All right, and so for our function, what we want to do is for our text that we display on the screen, we want to display one character at a time. And so for each character in this update in our callback, we want to update the text that's shown. So on the first call, we show a W in this example. Second call, we show WI. Third call, we show WIL. Fourth, WILD. And so what we need to do is for our callbacks, it's going to be dependent on the length of the string that we're displaying. And so to get that value, what we're going to do is we'll make a new variable. We're just going to call this length, and we'll set it equal to our text.length. And so that will give us the length of our string. And then what we need to do is we need to have a variable to track if we've actually completed all of our callbacks. We'll do let I, and we'll set it equal to 0. And then what we need to actually do is we need to reference our time for our clock, and we'll call the add event method, which will allow us to create this timer event. And then we can go ahead and specify a configuration for our timer event. And so in our configuration, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to specify a repeat. And so this allows us to tell Phaser how many times we want to repeat this event. So this will be equal to our length minus 1. Then what we want to do is we can specify a delay. And so the delay, this will be the number of milliseconds at which this timer event will fire. So if we don't provide this, it'll fire right away. And then the delay will make us wait so many milliseconds. So what we'll do is we'll reference our config object, and we will do .delay if it exists. And so we'll go ahead and add a fallback if it's not provided of 25 milliseconds. And then finally, what we want to do is we need to provide a callback. And so this callback is going to be our function that'll be invoked when this event happens. So this is where we can actually update our text game object. So what we'll do is we're going to reference our target. We're going to get the text on our text game object. And what we'll do is we're going to actually update it to be the same value with our new character. We'll then go ahead and increment our I value. And so that way we're keeping track of where we're at in our loop. And then what we'll do is we'll do if I is equal to our length minus 1. And we have a config. And we have a callback. And we'll do our config.callback. All right, so what we're doing here is for our event, we're going to invoke it based on the number of times we do our repeat property here, which means we're going to call our callback a number of times. And inside our callback, we're going to grab the text game object, so our current string, and then we're going to add a new character to our string. So back originally in our battle menu, when we update our text, we're actually setting it to an empty string before we want to animate it. And so on the first callback, this is how we grab that first value and add it to it. And then that's how we'll get that effect where we're building our string. So to keep track of that, we need our I variable to increment on every iteration so that we know what the next character is we need to show. And then finally, we need to know when we're finished. And so by checking if the length is done, that's how we know we're actually done with our animating our text. And then that's where we can call our callback if we provided one. All right, and so real quick, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add in our types. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and add in our code here. We'll go ahead and walk through it. So for animate text, for our params, the first thing we want is our phaser 3 scene, and then we have our text game object like we described. We'll have our text for our text game object, and then we'll have our config for our animate text. And so our config, like we said, we want to be optional, and we'll have default values if we don't provide it. And so for this, we created a new type def for our animate text config. And so this is just a new object. And on here, we have our two properties that we referenced in our code. We have our callback, and so this is optional. And we just expect it to return void like our typical callbacks. And then delay, where it's optional, and we'll have a default value of 25. And then the last thing we need to do is let's go ahead and import in our phaser library. Since we're using it in this code. And so instead of import from phaser, this is going to be .lib/phaser.js. All right, so now that we have our new animate text function, we're going to go ahead and add it to our code. So if we jump over to our battle menu, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and update in our two methods where we display text to our battle menu to go ahead and animate our text. However, we want this to be optional, and then so that way later on, we have the capability to go ahead and skip animating our text and just invoke our callback right away. And so what we'll do to support this is we'll add a new parameter to our methods, and we'll make it optional with a default value of false for skipping animation. So let's go ahead and add that real quick. So we'll do skip animation, and let's set it equal to false. Then what we want to do is if we skip our animation, so we'll have if skip animation is true, we're going to go ahead and run our logic that we had before. And what we'll want to do is go ahead and return early if we went through this loop. Then if we didn't skip our animation, this is when we'll actually want to go ahead and animate our text. And so when we animate our text, we'll reference our scene, our battle text game object line 1, and then we'll have our message that was provided that we want to set. And then this is where we can provide our configuration options. So what we'll do is we're going to delay 50 milliseconds. We'll have our callback, and in our callback, what we will do is this is where we'll set we're waiting for input to be false because now our animation is now done. And then if we have a callback, we need to go ahead and invoke that. And so basically all we're doing here is when we animate our text, basically what we're saying is once we're done animating, then we go ahead and do our logic that we did before. All right, and so what we need to do next is we need to go ahead and update our update info pane messages and wait for input method. So similar to what we did before, we'll add in our skipped animation param, and we're going to go ahead and set this equal to false if it's not provided. And then what we really need to do is when we call our update info pane with message method, this is where we really need that value. However, in our current code, we call this from multiple locations. So what we need to do is we need to store our reference to this variable in our class. So then that way we have it when we get to this method. So what we're going to do is we'll make a new private property, and we're going to call this queued message is skip animation. And we'll set that equal to false. And then let's jump up to the top of our class, and we'll go ahead and add that new property. And let's go ahead and add a default value. And we'll set it equal to false. So now if we come back down to our method, what we want to do is change this to skip animation. Then what we need to do is come down to our update info pane with message method. And now we'll go ahead and do our check. And so after we do our check for our queue, what we'll do is we'll come down to where we get our first message. And similar to before, this will be the logic that we'll want to run if we are skipping our animation. So after we get our message to display, we'll do our check that if our new property, so our queued info, our queued messages skip animation is set to true, then what we'd want to do is we'll go ahead and set our text. We'll set player input as true. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and exit out real quick because we don't want to do our input cursor animation. Then what we'll do is we need to check if our callback is defined. And if it's defined, we'll just go ahead and copy this. And we'll go ahead and call our callback. And we'll go ahead and set it to undefined. Then what we need to do is we need to go ahead and return early. All right, and then so what we'll do is now we're going to go ahead and play our animation, and we need to go ahead and call our animate text. So we'll go ahead and do animate text. We'll do our scene. We'll go ahead and do our battle text, game object line 1. And then we have our message that we want to display. And then finally, we'll have our configuration. So we'll stick with a delay of 50 milliseconds. And let's go ahead and add in our callback. And so for our callback, what we want to do is this is where we'll play our input cursor animation. And what we'll do is we'll set we're waiting for input to be true. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a new property for knowing if we're playing our queued message animation is actually playing. And the reason we're going to do that is when we handle our player input, we want to know if our animation is currently playing. And if it is, then we don't want to go ahead and do anything until it's completed. So to keep track of that, and so what we'll do this, and we'll do our queued message animation playing, and we'll set it equal to false because it's not playing. Then what we'll do is before we call our animate text, we'll set this to true. And then once we're done playing our animation, we're going to go ahead and reset it back to false. And then we just need to go ahead and add our new property. So let's come to the top of our class, go ahead and add that in. And then let's go ahead and add in a default value, and we'll set it equal to false. All right, so if we go ahead and save, we should be able to test our changes. So let's go ahead and refresh our scene. And now when our scene starts, you see we get this really nice animation of our text appearing on our screen. And if we provide input, we go ahead and animate our text. And then likewise, through all of our menu, we can see that we animate our text. And it's a really nice effect. All right, so the last thing we need to do is we need to update our handle player input method to check if we are actually animating our text currently, and then that way we don't skip ahead. Because what will happen is in our scene, if we go ahead and refresh, if we press the space key right when we're trying to display our text, it affects our game logic. We immediately go into our attack menu. Instead, we want to wait until everything's done before we allow the player to provide input. And so to do that, let's go to our handle player input method. And then at the top of our method, what we're going to do is we're just going to add a new if statement, and we'll do if our queued messages animation is playing. So if we're currently playing our animation and our input is equal to OK, then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and return early and not do anything in our code. So now if we come back to our scene, if we go ahead and try testing that and we press space, nothing should happen until we get to where we wait for player input and we press space again and nothing happens. All right, and so the last thing we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and add in some of our JS.comments for the new properties we added. So at the top of our class, I can copy this line here. We'll add that to our skip animation and our animation is playing. Then if we jump down to our two methods, let's go ahead and add in our new param and go ahead and set this equal to a Boolean. And this will be skip animation. And we will make this optional. And we'll set it equal to false for our default value. Copy this line. And we'll go ahead and paste it up in our other method. And we'll go ahead and save. All right, with that, that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we're going to work on adding in some animations for our player monsters. So when they appear on the screen, and when we remove them from the screen, we're going to have them animate onto the screen instead of just being there when the battle scene starts. So as a reminder, there is a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in this series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see some of the links on your screen now.